quiet farmer waited for his mail-order bride. A giant woman with a baby stepped down. The letter was folded twice, and I still had it in my shirt pocket when the stage came in. I don't know why I kept it. I'd read it enough times I didn't need to. Margaret Voss, it said, from Milwaukee, age 31, previously married, widowed. No mention of a child. Either she forgot to put it in or she knew better. I found out which one soon enough. The stage rolled in at 2:30 in the afternoon, which was later than I was told, and I stood at the edge of the plank walk with my hat in my hand and the sun hitting the back of my neck and a feeling I couldn't name sitting in my chest. Nerves, maybe. Something older than nerves. A man who's lived alone for 7 years on a piece of Kansas scrubland doesn't know any more what to do with himself when something's about to change. You stand still. You wait. You try not to look like you're waiting. The door opened and a boy in suspenders got out, then a woman with a carpet bag, then a man with a crate balanced on his knee. Then nothing for a moment. Then a pair of boots hit the step, big boots, brown leather, worn at the heels, and a woman unfolded herself out of that coach like a folded-up ladder straightening out. She was tall, I mean really tall, nearly as tall as me, and I go 6 foot even. She had dark hair pulled back hard and a jaw like she'd made a decision and stuck with it. One arm held the side rail of the coach, and the other arm held a baby against her chest, wrapped in a flour sack blanket, asleep, cheek pressed to her shoulder. She stood on the step for just a second and looked around the street the way a person does when they don't know what's going to meet them, and they've decided they can take it either way. Then she stepped down. I didn't move right off. I want to be honest about that. I stood there with my hat in my hands and looked at this woman and this baby, and I thought, well, that's a thing. She spotted me, I think, from the way I was standing apart and holding my hat like an idiot, and she came straight across the dirt toward me without waiting to be approached. Her stride was long and even. The baby didn't wake. She stopped about 4 feet away and said, "You're Cord Haverson." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Margaret Voss." She shifted the baby's weight. "This is Clara. She's 4 months old. I understand you didn't know about her. I'm sorry for that. I should have written it in the letter, and I didn't. I can explain my reason if you want to hear it, or I can just say it plain. I was afraid you'd say no." I looked at the baby. She had a round, soft face and a knot of brown hair, sleeping like she had no concerns whatsoever about the state of things. "Where's the father?" I said. "Dead before she was born, before the war got finished with him." I looked back at Margaret. She was watching me with the kind of steadiness that comes from having already made her peace with the worst possible answer. A woman who'd practiced holding herself together while someone else decided her fate. "You got a bag," I said. She blinked, one still on the coach. "I'll get it." That was the beginning of it. Not much of one, I know, but that's how it went. I'd come to Harlan County 7 years before with 2 horses, a wagon, and $300 I'd earned cutting timber in Ohio. I was 28. No particular reason for Kansas except that the land agent in Cincinnati said the soil was good and the water table was reasonable, and I believed him, which was the first mistake. And then I bought a quarter section in the middle of nowhere and started digging, which was the second. First year I lost 1 horse to a broken leg and had to shoot him myself. First winter I lost the tips of 2 fingers on my left hand to frost. You can see the stubs if you look. I don't try to hide them, and spent 3 weeks living off salt pork and the last of a bag of cornmeal while the wind cut under the door like it was looking for me specifically. But I stayed. I don't know what it says about a man that he stays in a place that's trying to kill him, but I stayed. By year 3, the cabin had a real floor and a real roof, and a well that didn't go dry in August. By year 5, I had 40 acres under cultivation and a barn with a sound foundation. By year 7, I had a neighbor 2 miles east who I got along with fine, a reputation at the Harlan General Store for paying what I owed, and an emptiness in the evenings that I'd stopped being able to pretend wasn't there. A man can fill his days, that's easy enough. You fill them so full there's no room for anything else, and then you go to sleep and you do it again. But the evening has a way of making itself known. The hour after supper when the work's done and the lamp's lit and the only sound is the wind and whatever's going on in your own head. I'd gotten used to it. I told myself I was used to it. And then one evening in February, I sat down at the table after supper and thought, I am 35 years old and I have not had a real conversation with another person in 6 weeks, and that's not. I didn't finish the thought, but 2 weeks later I wrote to the correspondence agency in St. Louis. Margaret's bag was a battered brown leather thing, heavy, with a broken clasp held shut with a piece of rope. I lifted it off the coach and carried it to the wagon and didn't say anything about the weight or the rope, and she noticed that I didn't, and something in her shoulders went down about half an inch. The ride out to the homestead was an hour. She sat on the wagon bench with Clara on her lap and looked at the country around us and didn't speak for a long time. I let her look. There's nothing to say about Kansas that the view doesn't say better, and it doesn't say anything kind. Brown grass to the horizon. A few trees along the creek bed to the north like they were embarrassed to be standing there. Sky the color of old tin. After a while she said, "It's bigger than I thought." "Yeah." The agency said plains. I thought I understood plains. "You can't really understand it until you're in it," I said. "Then you can't ununderstand it." She thought about that. Clara made a small noise in her sleep and Margaret adjusted her grip, the way you do without thinking, the automatic reflex of a mother who's learned what every small noise means. "Did you have someone before?" she said. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching the grass. "No. Never married. Family. Sister in Ohio. We write sometimes." She nodded. Then, "What made you write to the agency?" I thought about lying. Thought about saying something about needing help with the place, which was true enough to pass. But she'd asked it straight, and she was sitting next to me with a 4-month-old daughter and no place to go back to, and I thought she deserved straight in return. "Got tired of the evenings," I said. She didn't laugh or make a face. She just said, "Me too," and went back to watching the grass, and I felt something settle between us like the air before a rain. The cabin was what it was. One room, a loft, a stove that drew well, curtains my sister had sent me that I'd put up because she asked, and which I'd never thought about one way or another until the afternoon I watched Margaret notice them. She stood in the doorway and looked around. Clara awake now, blinking at the new ceiling. Margaret went to the table, ran her hand across the wood, went to the stove and checked the firebox, went to the window and looked out toward the barn. "You built all this yourself," she said. "Mostly. Neighbor helped me with the barn roof. The floor's level. Took me a while to get it right." She turned around and looked at me in a way I wasn't quite sure what to do with. Not the assessing look from the street. Something else. Like she was revising an answer she'd already written. "It's good work," she said, just that, good work. I'd been told I worked hard before. My neighbor said it. The man at the store said it. It didn't land the same way. That first night she took the loft with Clara and I slept on my usual spot on the floor by the stove, which I'd been doing for years when the cold warranted it. It didn't warrant it. April was warming fast, but it felt right to give her the space. I lay there listening to the sounds a cabin makes when there are other people in it. The different weight on the floorboards above me. A baby stirring and being soothed with a low humming I couldn't quite hear the tune of. After a while, silence again. It was a different kind of silence than I'd gotten used to. That's the only way I know how to say it. We married at the Harlan Church 8 days later. Reverend Oakes was a thin man with a heavy Bible, and he performed the ceremony fast, which was fine by me. And Margaret wore the dress she'd arrived in, which was dark gray with white buttons, and she stood straight and said the words clearly and without hesitation. Mrs. Oakes served coffee and dried apple cake in the parish hall after, and the neighbor from 2 miles east, Delbert Cruz, came and shook my hand and gave Margaret a look like he was reassessing me upward, which I noticed and didn't say anything about. Clara slept through the whole thing in a basket Mrs. Oakes had produced from somewhere. On the ride back, Margaret said, "Cruz seems decent." "He is. Helped me out a time or two." He was surprised that you'd, she stopped. "That I'd what?" "I think he thought you'd send us back." I kept my eyes on the road. Why would I do that? She was quiet for a moment. "Because I came with more than you bargained for." "You came with a baby," I said. "I've got room for a baby." She didn't answer, but she shifted Clara's basket between us on the bench and put her hand flat on the board beside it and left it there. And after a minute, my hand was beside hers and our fingers were touching, and we rode the last mile home like that. June was a hard month, not between us, between the land and everything I'd planted. We had 3 weeks without real rain, and then a rain that came all at once and beat the young corn halfway down, and I spent 2 days in the field trying to prop stems with stakes and string and mud on my boots up to the knee. Margaret came out the second afternoon with water and food wrapped in cloth and stood at the edge of the field watching me. "Can they be saved?" she said. "Some. Which ones?" I showed her. She handed Clara to me, just handed her over, no preamble, the way you hand someone a thing you trust them with, and went into the field in her work dress and started staking alongside me. She didn't ask how to do it. She watched once and then she did it. Her hands were big and capable, and she worked without complaining about the mud or the wet or her skirt getting ruined. And Clara sat on my hip and watched her mother work and grabbed at my beard with one fist when she could reach it. We saved most of it, more than I would have saved alone. That evening I said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said. She was nursing Clara at the table, which she did without self-consciousness, which I had gotten used to fast because she'd made it clear she wasn't going to feel badly about it. "It's our field." "Our field?" I didn't say anything. But I thought about it after, lying in the loft. She was up there now. We'd arranged it that way after the first 2 weeks. I thought about that word, and how long it had been since anything here was our anything, and how simple it had sounded when she said it, the way the true things sound when a person says them plainly. The trouble came in August from a man named Pell. He ran the biggest cattle operation in the county, or thought he did, and he'd been acquiring land along the creek, legally sometimes and otherwise the rest of the time. He wanted the strip of my quarter section that ran along the North Creek bank. He'd sent a man in June to say he'd buy it. I said it wasn't for sale. In July, the man came back with a number. I said the number didn't matter. In August, Pell came himself. He was a thick man with a good suit and the kind of easy manner that's learned, not natural, the manner of a man who's gotten what he wanted often enough that he expects to keep getting it. He drove up in a buggy with 2 men on horses flanking him and stopped in front of the cabin and called my name. I came out. Margaret appeared in the doorway behind me, Clara on her hip, not because she was frightened, but because she'd seen the buggy from the window and decided to know what was happening. Pell looked at her and then looked at me. "New addition," he said, like she was a piece of equipment. I didn't say anything to that. He went through his offer again, more money this time. He made it sound reasonable. He had a way of talking that made the other man's position sound childish, which I recognized as a technique and didn't let bother me. "Still not for sale," I said. "Water rights on that strip are valuable, Haverson, more valuable than you might think. I know what they're worth." "I wonder if you do," he smiled, not a pleasant smile, the kind that's telling you something without saying it. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "Mr. Pell, I've been on this land 7 years. I dug the well myself. I built the barn, the cabin, the fence lines. I've got a wife and a daughter now, and we're going to be here a good while longer. The creek strip isn't for sale today, and it won't be for sale next month, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't send anyone else to tell me otherwise." He looked at me for a long moment. His 2 horsemen were watching, waiting for some signal. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Maybe so." He turned the buggy and left. I stood in the yard and watched him go, and when the dust settled, I turned and found Margaret right behind me, 2 steps off the porch. She'd heard the whole thing. She handed Clara to me. Then she reached out and put her hand flat on my chest, just once, just for a second, and felt my heart going hard under her palm. "That was right," she said, "what you said. He may not let it go." "I know." She looked at the road where the buggy had gone. "We'll deal with it." "We again." Pell wasn't done. 2 of his men cut one of my fence lines in September, and I spent a day and a half restringing it and found one of my steers missing afterward. I rode to Harlan and spoke to the marshal, a tired man named Coe who wrote things down and promised to look into it and looked into approximately nothing. I rode to Pell's outfit and stood at his gate and told one of his hands I wanted to speak to him. Pell didn't come out. I came home that evening and sat down at the table and looked at my hands for a minute. The 2 short fingers on the left, the roughness of the right from the fence wire. Margaret put a plate in front of me and sat down across the table with Clara in her lap. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I don't know yet." She nodded, didn't push it, fed Clara a bit of softened bread and waited. After a while I said, "The marshal isn't going to do anything. He answers to the county, and Pell has friends in the county. What about Cruz? What about him? He's not the only neighbor. There's the Thayer place 4 miles south and that German family on the East Fork. Pell's going to get to them too eventually. She looked at me. Men who work land don't want someone telling them they can't keep it. You might find more people on the same side than you think. I looked at her. When did you figure that out? I said. She almost smiled. About a week after I got here. I paid attention. I'd been alone long enough that I'd forgotten what it was like to have another set of eyes on a problem. A person who'd been watching and thinking and hadn't said anything yet because they were waiting to see if you needed them to. She'd been doing that this whole time. Watching. Learning the shape of the problem and waiting until I sat down at the table and looked at my hands. I went to see Cruz the next morning. He listened and said he had the same problem. Pell's man had been to him in July. We rode to the Thayer place. By afternoon, there were 5 of us, and one of them had a cousin who was an attorney in the county seat. The legal business took most of the winter. I won't go through all of it. The short of it is that Pell had been doing the same thing in 3 other counties, and the attorney found the thread that unraveled it. And by February, Pell had agreed to a settlement that gave back 2 of the land grabs and left the rest of us alone. Not a total victory. Enough of one. The night we got the word, Margaret made a real supper, the kind where you use the good things you've been saving. And Cruz came and one of the Thayer boys, and we ate at the table until late. After they left, I banked the stove, and she was washing the dishes, and I came and stood beside her, and she handed me a towel without looking up. You did that, she said. We all did. No, she said. You went to Cruz, you went first, that was you. I dried a plate. I didn't know what to say to that. She handed me another. You should know that, she said, that it was you. Clara turned 1 year old in December. We marked it with a cake that used up most of my sugar. She could stand now, holding the edge of things, and she'd started saying a sound that was nearly but not quite a word. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's jaw and the undecided eyes of a baby who hasn't settled on a color yet. She reached for me the same way she reached for Margaret, which had happened so gradually that I couldn't tell you when it started. Somewhere between the field in June and the fence line in September, I'd become the person she held her arms out for when someone picked her up and she didn't want to be put down. I wasn't her father in the way it would be written anywhere. But I was the man who got up in the dark when she cried because Margaret was ill with a fever in November, and who held her for an hour against the cold while the stove caught and the cabin warmed, and who learned the sound of her settling back to sleep and felt something I didn't have a name for every time she did. When a child trusts you like that, completely, without reason, the way only very young children and animals will, it gets inside something in you that you didn't know was empty. That spring, I broke another 10 acres for planting. Margaret had started a kitchen garden behind the cabin, her idea, laid out the way she wanted, which was in long rows with specific things together based on some system she'd worked out in her head that I didn't fully follow, but that produced, by August, more food than I'd been growing in the same space. The woman knew how to grow things. She'd grown up doing it, she said, in a place in Wisconsin where the summer was shorter than here and the soil harder, and anything you got out of the ground was something you'd earned. One afternoon, I came in from the field and found her kneeling in the garden, Clara sitting in the dirt beside her, both of them examining a beetle that was making its way across a leaf. Margaret was talking to Clara in a low voice about the beetle, explaining something, and Clara was watching the beetle with complete concentration and reaching for it with one finger, and neither of them heard me come up. I stood and watched them for a minute. The light was going long and gold the way it does in late afternoon on the plains when it stops being just light and starts being something you notice. It lay across the garden and across the 2 of them and across the dark soil and the green rows, and I thought, I built this. Not just the cabin and the fence and the well. This, the whole shape of what this day looks like. A man can work his whole life for that, cannot even know that's what he's working for until it's right there in front of him. Margaret looked up. Found me standing there. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Supper's going to be late." I got distracted. "Take your time," I said. She looked at me for another second. The kind of look you can only get from someone who's learned you slowly, who's been paying attention since the moment she stepped off a coach and walked across a street toward a man holding his hat, and has made up her mind, really made up her mind about what she found. She turned back to the garden. I went inside to wash up. The winter that Clara turned 2, we had a hard storm that came down from the north in October, earlier than usual, and dropped 2 feet of snow over 3 days, and blocked the road to Harlan so completely that we didn't see another person for almost 3 weeks. I won't say it wasn't hard. The woodpile got lower faster than I'd planned, and I was out cutting in whether a man has no business being out in, and there were 2 days where the cattle needed tending in wind that made it dangerous to be 50 yards from the cabin. But the structure held. The stove drew. The cellar had enough. One evening near the end of the 2nd week, we were sitting by the stove, Clara asleep in the loft, the wind going hard outside, and Margaret said, "Are you sorry?" I said, "What for?" "That I came with more than you bargained for." She was looking at her hands, not at me. She'd asked a version of this before or implied it, but this was the first time she'd put it straight. I thought about it. Not for show, I really thought about it. "No," I said. "You couldn't have known what you were getting." "That's true. Most men would have sent us back." "I know." She looked up at me then. She had a way in lamplight of looking like she was deciding something each time, even things she'd long since decided. Something about the light. "Why didn't you?" she said, quiet, not asking for reassurance, just wanting to know. I thought about the morning at the stage. The big boots on the step, the flour sack blanket and the sleeping baby, and the way she'd stood on the step for that 1 second looking at the street, ready to take what came. "Because you had the same look in your eye I did," I said, "when you got off that coach, like you'd gotten tired of the evenings." She was quiet for a long moment. The wind hit the cabin and moved on. Then she crossed the few feet between us and sat down beside me, not across, beside, and put her head on my shoulder just like that, the way you do with someone you've decided about completely. Clara's weight wasn't between us. Nothing was between us. Just the stove and the lamplight and the sound of the storm doing its worst outside a structure that wasn't going to give. I put my arm around her. She was warm and solid, and she smelled like wood smoke and bread, and she stayed. There's a thing that happens to a man when he's been alone long enough. He starts to believe that's all there is. Not out of self-pity, he's not sitting there crying about it, he's working. He's getting up every morning and doing the thing, but somewhere underneath it he's made his peace with a smaller life than the one he started out expecting. He talks himself into it, tells himself the quiet is fine, tells himself the evening is fine, and for a while it even is because you get good at it, and being good at something is a kind of satisfaction. And then something happens, and you understand all at once that you were only good at it because it was all you had. I'm 51 years old now. Clara is in school in Harlan, which means she rides in with Cruz boy every morning and comes back in the afternoon full of things. She's learned that she has to tell someone immediately, and usually that someone is me. Margaret's kitchen garden has become something people in the county know about. She sold seed stock for the first time this past fall and made more from it than I expected. The cabin has 2 rooms now, added on 3 years back, and a porch that gets the evening light. Last October, a man came by who wanted to buy a section of my land, not Pell's outfit, a different man, a legitimate one with legitimate money. I told him I wasn't interested. He left without argument. I went back inside, and Margaret was at the stove, and I sat down at the table, and she brought me coffee and sat across from me and asked how it had gone. "Fine," I said. I told him no. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at me. "Good," she said. "Just that good." I picked up my coffee. The evening was coming in through the window, and the kitchen smelled like whatever she was making, and I could hear, from Harlan somewhere, the sounds that carry 2 miles on a still day. It was quiet the way it should be quiet with someone in the room. The kind of quiet that's not empty. "I built this, all of it." And she stayed.